It's round two of the 2025 ABB FIA Formula E World Championship. We're in Mexico City for our 9th visit to this wonderful part of the world. Very much looking forward to the E-Prix taking place this afternoon. But of course, before that, we have to get free practice 2 underway. Season 11 kicked off a month ago in Brazil, and ultimately, it was Mitch Evans who put in a meteoric performance to go from last to first on the grid to take a fantastic victory for Jaguar TCS Racing. Here is the 24-25 calendar. You can see we kicked off in Brazil at the start of December where Mitch Evans took victory. We're now here in Mexico for round 2. In February we head over to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia for our first ever visit there. Then we're in Miami in April, on to Monaco. Then we've got a bit of an Asian leg with Japan, China and Indonesia for rounds 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. Then Berlin and London completing the season towards the end of July as well. Well, the city of Mexico here, wonderful it is in terms of the culture, the food, everything is fantastic, and also the population as well. 21.8 million people live in this area. You can see the entry list for this event, the Andretti's, the Cupras, the DS Penske's and so on and so forth. 22 drivers set to take to the grid here for the race this afternoon. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what is going to happen. And a bit of overnight rain as well has made things a little bit interesting ahead of free practice 2 this morning. See the drivers here all buoyant and ready to get things underway after the winter break that we've had following Sao Paulo. And Alan McNish, Billy Munger joining me in the commentary box. Alan, free practice 1 yesterday was a bit of an interesting affair. Lap times obviously significantly faster than we had this time last year, but you can see it's a bit of an early start for us here this morning.
Yeah, certainly free practice 1 on Friday evening in very different conditions to what they'll find this morning. Everybody coming in the dark. The sun is just starting to rise and break through the clouds, but it's been very, very wet overnight, and that will have cleaned all the rubbish and the grip off the circuit. There'll be a clean start again.
So have a look at this Mexico City circuit, the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez for round 2 of the ABB FIA Formula E World Championship. As I said, Mexico City, 21.8 million people living in the urban area, and this is the circuit, 2.630 kilometres, our 9th visit to this track. Overtaking zone down in towards turn 1. A little bit tighter actually this year. They've moved the barrier forwards, but you can see that's how you can set and move up into that corner. Where else do you think we're going to be looking for incidents and moments over the course of this circuit, Al?
Well, personally, I think we're going to be looking for incidents everywhere, but I think we'll see a lot into here, into the stadium section. Down the inside, it'll be quite brave. You will need to have, I would say, a lot of commitment to do it, but it's also the attack mode zone is on the outside of that corner. And that's another point where we have seen people being able to use it. Now we're getting into the final corner that saw a lot of people struggling. Turn 19 leading onto the long back straight. With the all-wheel drive, once they're in attack mode, 350 kilowatts, then it makes this corner super interesting, with a couple of people kissing the barrier yesterday.
Yeah, certainly were. This is Pascal Wehrlein last year going on to take victory, and of course he would go on to win the title, as did Jake Dennis the year before that. So maybe there's a bit of an omen there coming into this weekend. We'll wait and see whether that proves to be true when we get to the end of the 2025 season. But now action stations are ready. A few dark clouds overhead here, Billy. Conditions not exactly optimal with this overnight rain. You can see a lot cooler, obviously, as well, compared to where we were for free practice 1 yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, low track temperatures are definitely going to make things tricky for the drivers. I mean, you've got a new tyre compound for this season, which they've only had 1 race under their belts with, so they'll be trying to figure out how to get that into the right working window in these difficult conditions that they haven't faced before.
And you would say that it's an all-weather tyre as well, so it ran in the dry, it'll run in the heat, it'll run in the cold, and it has to run in the rain. So looking at the circuit there, Billy, it looked like it was very shiny, and usually circuits, when they're shiny, means they've got very little grip.
Yeah, actually, in commentary yesterday, we were saying about the different surfaces that we've got around the circuit. It makes things particularly tricky here.
Yeah, it certainly does. It's a bit of a patch quilt around some parts of this track, different surfaces, as you say. Green light is on then, ready to get free practice 2 underway here this morning at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. Cars on track for the first time on race day. A reminder of the Drivers' Championship coming into the second round of the season. Of course, it does reflect the results from when we were in Sao Paulo a month ago. Mitch Evans leading the charge ahead of Antonio Felix da Costa by 6 points. He was second on the road and also got a bonus point for fastest lap as well. An amazing job from Taylor Barnard in the Neon McLaren to get a podium in only his 3rd ever weekend. But look at the surface and look at how slippery it is down towards. That's going into the left-hander there.
Yeah, and that's a part of the circuit that's not used for the Formula 1 Grand Prix, so therefore it is actually going to be relatively, I would say, green in that respect. but it is extremely slippery with the first car on track just running wide, as now they're down to the hairpin at turn 5 and 6.
I think it's quite an important fact to make, that today is a super busy day for the drivers and the team. So when we've got conditions like this, you have to, you know, play it with a pinch of salt, leave a bit of room, a bit of margin on some of these corners where the circuit is this slippery, is this green. You don't want to stick yourself in the tyre wheel here in practice, make the team's life really tricky to turn the car around for qualifying.
And we saw also in some testing earlier on this season, drivers struggling to get the tyres in the right operating window. We heard the virtual race engineer a few minutes ago just saying that tyre temperature is going to be absolutely critical. So I'm keen to see how this is going to work out over the course of this session. Of course, if the rain doesn't hit, the track should get drier, but it's not exactly ideal.
I guess the one thing you have with the nature of this circuit, you've got a lot of long apex corners, which means normally when we saw yesterday in practice with the dry conditions we had, the tyres were particularly overheating, and particularly in the last section of the lap where we're seeing them come through now. So hopefully that will allow the drivers to build some tyre temperature when we've got these trickier conditions.
It's looking pretty tough at the moment, just with the oversteer that's coming as soon as they're applying the power or applying the steering. One thing I do think we will find in this session, as we've got 38 minutes, so the track's going to evolve and change unless there's more rain. It will just get better and better, is that some drivers in the same team will be much quicker than others. I'm thinking of Envision, for example. Robin Freins, he is excellent in these conditions. When it's tricky, when it's difficult, when it's changing, he's just got a feel and a sensitivity for it. Whereas Sebastian Buemi, ultimately, same sort of speed, but he does it in a very, very different way.
So looking here at Oliver Rowland making his way down in towards the hairpin section of the circuit. This is Jake Dennis in the Andretti garage. New helmet for him here this weekend, special livery.
I don't want to risk locking.
Team radio here.
Rear's locking, he said, so when he's on the brakes, then the rear's locking up. That means that he's got to come off the brakes slightly to actually turn into the corner, otherwise it's full rally spec, and you'll be doing a handbrake turn. You want to try to take that as gently as possible, all your applications on the throttle and on the brakes, Billy, because otherwise the car will just react so aggressively underneath you.
Yeah, you've got to be, as a driver in these conditions, super smooth with your inputs. That's on the throttle, that's on the brake, that's with your steering inputs too, as we see Oliver Rowland there, really having a little bit of a wobble there coming through the last couple of corners, just trying to maybe find some different lines where the grip is, because where you have these long radius corners, it does present an opportunity for drivers to explore different lines to find the grip.
And those surface changes we were talking about, the cracks in the road, they become even more prominent in weather like this. You can see Rowland just sliding around like a dog on a polished floor, trying to get traction down on the circuit here as he comes across the line to set the first representative lap time, so 1:42.446. That's significantly about 30 seconds slower than we were this time yesterday in the fully dry conditions, but he was fighting that car all the way around, especially in those slow corners.
I'm sure that's the first time he's ever been described as a dog on a slippery surface. But you see there the change of surface between the dark, which looks like a matte black in comparison to a shiny black. That matte black will have a lot more grip than the shiny black surface.
So looking here then at Antonio Felix da Costa, he was the fastest man in free practice one yesterday evening, 1:10.855 for him, fresh off the back of that podium as well. Starting off season 11 in really strong form, Billy, considering where he was 12 months ago. He didn't score any points until we got to Mazzano, when he then went on to basically get himself right into championship contention. If he can kick off his season in the same way and continue that same run of form, you dare say that he could be one to watch this year. Yeah,
100%. You look at the turnaround of form that he had, where, like you said, at the start of last season, he was nowhere in particular compared to his teammate Pascal Wehrlein, who hit the ground running. All of a sudden, in the back half of last season, Antonio was the driver to beat. He was so consistently in the mix every single race towards the end of the season, and it's good to see him carry that momentum through to the Gen 3 Evo car, because that's another factor to play into it, where you build all this momentum and this positivity with the car, and then things change. You get all-wheel drive, you get the differences in the tyre compound that the drivers have got, but it's good to see he's carried that form through.
Let's have a look here at David Beckman. He was the man who was in the wars yesterday. More on that in a couple of moments. This is down in towards turn one. I think he's just going to run off, isn't he? Yeah, locking the rears, going into there. And straight off onto the asphalt on the outside of the first corner. As I said, he was in the wars yesterday, clipped the wall at the end of free practice one in a big way. The team having to do a fair old rebuild.
I can't hit much more than 15, 20 bar with brake warm-up. Please advise if you want me to use it. Risk of glazing. Those pressures are okay.
And This is basically to press, when he's pressing the brake, to try and get heat into the system and also regenerate. And he's got 15 bar is very, very limited. Normally in the dry conditions, they'll be pushing 70 bar of pressure. And that 70 bar in the dry will be pressed and it'll be within about 0.2 of a second. But he's just effectively tapping the brake. That's the lightest of touches, and already it's locking up.
You've got to treat the controls like you've got an egg underneath the brake pedal in sort of weather like this, don't you, Billy? Just to try and make sure you get the car stopped, which Dennis failed to do so there.
Yeah, you really need to be super smooth with your inputs. That's 100% the way to do it in these cars in particular. There's so much going on with all the systems they have on board as well. They have to manage as they're going through. Interesting just having a look there from the onboard, or just the front head shots of the cars going down into turn 1 there. We spoke yesterday about the track limits going down into turn 1, how the cars were, some of them, all 4 wheels to the outside of the white line there. Today they're putting their cars over the middle of that white line, because in the wet, the white lines normally are slipperier than the actual surface of the track itself. So there is a slight adjustment from the drivers from condition to condition.
Yeah, important to take things a little bit steady, especially in this second free practice session. Let's have a look here at Sebastian Buemi making his way through the Peril Tardy. You can see him soaring away at the wheel and fighting for traction, kicking up a bit of standing water there. Makes for a lovely super slow-mo shot, not necessarily the fastest way to negotiate.
I was just thinking the same thing. It looks pretty slick when they manage to make it, to pull it off, but it doesn't look far away on occasion from, you know, putting yourself in the wall. So the driver's got to be careful, haven't they?
Well, Sun Kang from Fast and Furious is here. Maybe Buemi's been taking some tips from his driving style.
Potentially.
Oh, Mortara is very close to the wall there on the outside. We were talking in the van on the way in to the circuit this morning, and there's a bit of a hype around Mortara, especially in conditions like this. Maybe he could be one to watch. Yeah,
I think for me, he's definitely one that in these mixed conditions, I can see excelling. I think he's a very experienced driver, and I think in these conditions, he's been obviously around the block a lot in Formula E. I think that will pay to have that experience. You look at the likes of Taylor Barnard, I think in the dry, he's been absolutely excelling, but he's someone who hasn't had as much experience as the likes of an Eduardo Mortara in the mixed conditions, and I think that could potentially play into his hands. I think he'd be one to watch if it stays like this throughout qualifying and the race later today.
And Mahindra kicked off things very well for season 11 back in Sao Paulo, finishing in 4th and 5th place respectively for both of their drivers, and now also sitting in 4th in the Teams Championship as well. There is Fred Bertrand, team principal for the Mahindra Racing outfits. Had a dinner with him actually just over the Christmas period. Found out that he loves a bit of skiing, so he's been doing a bit of that in his downtime.
Bertrand, it does sound like someone who would be familiar with the slopes, doesn't it?
It certainly does, yeah. Well, he's been enjoying that, but also good altitude training, especially for here in Mexico, because what are we, 2.2 thousand metres above sea level. Let's have a look here at Mortara, just locking and sliding wide.
Is it the commentator's curse?
I know. Thinking that.
It's already started.
Bit of rallycross there for Mortara down at the first corner. Let's go down to Alexa, who is in pit lane. She's catching up with the Cupra Kiro team. David Beckman, as I said, ended up in the wall at the end of free practice 1 yesterday, and the team had to do a fair bit of rebuilding work, so let's see exactly what's gone on there.
Thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, I'm joined by Alex from Kiro, and I wonder if you could start us off by talking us through what happened with David at the end of the session yesterday. Was there any rebuilding work required overnight?
Yeah, he clipped the wall at the end of yesterday and have quite a lot of damage on the car, but we have fixed it. So we're good to go. So yesterday the balance was a bit difficult for him, and obviously this thing happened when you try to push on the limit, when the balance wasn't perfect, and also in the green check. But that's what their job for. So today we put everything back together. The car is in good shape. So we'll see how it goes. But weather doesn't look really consistent in the moment, so it will be a difficult week before qualify.
What kind of damage are we talking on the car?
Some rear suspensions mainly, but we need to send the parts back to the factory after the race to understand a bit more. Yeah.
And let's talk weather. How are the conditions out on track there? Because we saw David taking a little excursion at turn 1 just now as well.
Yeah, it's obviously this morning is a damp track. It's wet, but it's a bit tricky because it looks will go dry and drier. So I think it's a very difficult condition for the team and the driver to really understand what should we do in quality. It will be a real guess. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex. Best of luck this weekend.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks to Alexa as well. Good to hear there and find out what's gone on.
Okay, I want to try one lap of aggressive warm-up, like burnout and stuff, because this is pointless.
Yeah, copy. We're discussing pressures. Try to warm up your tires in the meantime.
Yeah.
See Da Costa clear, you know, it's pointless driving around, slipping and sliding around. The team are looking at trying to maybe boost the pressures much, much higher to try to give a crown in the centre of the tyre. And that sometimes helps. Sometimes it's actually exactly the opposite way as well. But the thing that impressed me was that you saw the spray just powering off the back tyres as he just put a little bit of pressure onto the throttle.
So just under 30 minutes to go then in this session. Looking at the Maseratis fighting their way through the final corner. Jake Hughes and Stoffel van Dorn, part of that outfit for season 11. New driver lineup at the helm there. Max Günther moving over to DS Penske, as Van Dorn just goes a little bit deep down at turn 1. And also on the other side, the Garage and Derulo not continuing with that team for season 11. So be interesting to see what they're going to be able to pull out of the bag, and hopefully a bit more consistency within the team over the off-season compared to this time last year. Will just help them make their way further up the order, because although they took a victory in season 10 in Tokyo, it was a challenging year for the Maserati MSG team. You can see the sun now sort of starting to appear through the clouds here, Billy, and hopefully that's going to dry the circuit out a little bit more lively ahead of qualifying.
Yeah, I hope so. I think I'd rather it either be fully wet or fully dry conditions, and I'm sure the drivers will be in the same boat, because these mixed conditions are probably the hardest for the drivers to face, because you go into corners with different grip levels each time you arrive, and it kind of almost feels like it would be a case where the last one across the line, if you've got a drying circuit, would be likely to take pole position. The margins are super tight across the whole field in dry conditions, so it does, you know, offer the opportunity when we've got these mixed conditions for someone to, you know, excel, stand out amongst the pack, and maybe qualify in a position we wouldn't expect usually.
Yeah, you see the drivers here making their way through this stadium section and going through towards the Peraltada. Lap times, of course, not necessarily, well, nowhere near, as a matter of fact, where we were for free practice one this time yesterday. 1:10.8 was the quickest time set by Antonio Felix da Costa. We're at a 1:32.7 as it stands for now.
Coming back a little bit on what Antonio Felix da Costa was talking about, is we see a lock up there of both front tyres coming in, and then from the Maserati, but also what you were saying, Billy. He said it's a waste of time. They've got qualifying starting an hour and a half after this session. Looking at the weather, there is a chance of rain, but it's only 15% chance of rain in this region, so it's likely that it's actually going to be dry for the end of qualifying. So it's more a case of following the track and the development of the track to understand what you may need for the beginning of qualifying, than necessarily actually driving for expectation in a wet race or something, in my opinion. So therefore, from the driver's perspective, it's a real risk and reward. You know, you can easily push too much and end up in the wall, and if you end up in the wall, then you're qualifying and your race is finished anyway.
Equally, with these mixed conditions, if we do get rain and then the circuit continues to dry, it's good to be out on circuit right now to get that experience of knowing when it dries, where the grip comes to in each corner, which part of the circuit dries quicker than the other. So you've got an advantage if you're learning on the go in the race, compared to if you've done more laps in practice and qualifying, you get that opportunity to have more experience in those conditions.
Looking at Verne coming through the final corner there as he went quickest, the car was in a beautiful four-wheel drift. It was really sweet to watch. But if you look at the Stellantis powertrains, they're up there 1, 2, 3 and 4.
I'm just wondering actually as well, obviously we've got all-wheel drive now in Formula E. Is in wet conditions such as this, what's that going to mean for the drivers? Obviously you've got power going through all four wheels. That will give you more grip in theory then, won't it?
Huge advantage. But it can only do that when you're in attack mode.
Yeah.
And so from that point of view, it is a huge advantage. It does two things. Principally, it heats up the front tyres, because the front tyres, instead of just turning, are actually accelerating and putting power onto the ground, so you generate front tyre temperature. But the other thing is that you tend to allow a better balance, so not all of the power's going through the rear, so you can actually control the car a little bit better, especially when you do have low grip and small lateral load like coming out of the chicane there.
You see significantly more traction there for Jake Hughes here. Still not setting the timing screens alight at the moment, though, is Jake Hughes, but lap time's certainly heading in the right direction. Yeah,
the lap time's definitely coming down, and just touching what Alan was just saying there about, you know, the all-wheel drive and the huge advantage that you'll gain from that. I'll be interested to see if we have mixed conditions in the race and potentially a drying track, depending on, you know, how that, you know, how it changes throughout the day with the sessions that we've still got. It could be quite a strategic element to to the race itself of when you use the attack mode, because if it's slippery at the start of the race and you use it, you could find a lot more time then towards the end of the race where potentially attack mode might not be so beneficial.
Absolutely. I mean, also, there's a possibility here, you know, playing devil's advocate, Billy, as well. If you look at going into qualifying, if we have mixed conditions such as this, especially in the group stage, you could get a case of last driver to cross the line ends up being quickest.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's definitely a possibility with the way things are looking out there at the minute. But there is still a couple of hours as we see number 55 there, Jake Hughes, running a little bit wide there through the stadium section, it looked like to me. It's a tricky section, a lot of corners, yeah, just picking up a bit of understeer, it looks like.
Zebra still up. So now you have Q1 acknowledge and push to box.
So just hearing team radio there for Jake Hughes in the Maserati. Somebody else who has experience of the Maserati was part of the all-women's Formula E test in Jarama earlier this year. It's Tatiana Calderon. Tatiana, delighted to join us here in the commentary box. Thanks so much for coming along. Tell us, first of all, how did you get on in the all-women's test in Jarama?
Oh, good morning and thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to come to Mexico and experience Formula E from a different point of view. But yeah, it was really exciting. You know, I had tested the Gen 2 car, but the Gen 3 Evo was incredible. Like with the 650 kilobytes on the race arts, on you know, the development of the car. For over like 5 years that I haven't been testing it. It's been incredible. So happy to also see a lot of familiar faces in Maserati because I've worked with them in the past. So hopefully they can score some important points this weekend.
Tatiana, you mentioned there about how you've driven the Gen 2 car, and now you've had the opportunity through the all-women's test to drive the Gen 3 Evo car. Just put us in the cockpit. What was it like, you know, the differences of what you felt from the driver's perspective actually driving that car? Where were the huge differences that you've noticed in the evolution of the cars?
Yeah, I think for sure like the braking was one of them, but also like how much agile the Gen 3 Evo was. The tires definitely made a huge difference in that regard also, but just the experiencing the 650 kilowatts, that was incredible, like to see the jump and the adaptation that these drivers need from, you know, having like a practice kind of pace to that one lap is something that I was really impressed with. But it's a really tricky car to drive, I have to say. And
did you get the chance to do many practice starts? We've heard all the drivers saying about how the acceleration in these cars is just next level.
It was crazy. Like I thought I was sick, like on the stomach. You know, I've never experienced something like that. And you know, I've driven like quick cars, but that was sort of really impressive. I think the reactions of these drivers in the start must be like super sharp.
And in terms of conditions out on track here at the moment, we can see obviously it's wet, it's drying. It looks like a handful out there, doesn't it? Exactly,
and like even like, you know, it's not an easy car to drive in terms of like steering weight either. So, you know, to catch the car, some slow speed stuff, but like the rear sliding.
Like Beckman there.
That was a nice save, considering his save yesterday as well on the last corner. So yeah, I wouldn't mind having like a bit more of a drier track at this time, but yeah, it is a really tricky car to drive, and respect for all these amazing drivers that are like really close together all the time here in Formula E.
And if we look at Sao Paulo, obviously the new era of Formula E began with Gen 3 Evo. The racing there was incredible. There's a lot of emphasis now on attack mode, really meaning that drivers can make those moves now, which is fantastic. And I think here in Mexico City, we're down for a cracker of a race this afternoon.
Yeah, Mexico never disappoints, definitely, but yeah, I think it's making the racing much more interesting, not only from a driver's perspective, but you know, the strategy and when do you come in and when do you deploy those attack modes. So I think it's yeah, a combination that I've always been very impressed with, the technology, the strategy, and the preparation behind Formula E.
Tatiana, I was just going to touch on the fact that, we talk about how the cars are, changing with each evolution of the car. We're getting faster, we're getting, more performance out of these cars. But I want to touch on the fact that the opportunity you got, with the all-women's test to actually drive the car yourself. Did you feel like you learned something as a driver, driving this different style of car? Did you come away feeling like you've improved as a driver in general?
Yeah, I think you always learn so much, and also from working with such talented people at Maserati, you know, looking at the different areas, the different things in terms of like efficiency, once you do like energy safe laps, and all the parameters that you have in Formula E in order to like sort of make the perfect car for each corner. I think that brings a lot of knowledge to the driver technically, and working with your engineering, fine-tuning that, it's a huge amount of time, both on performance, but also like analyzing all the data that you have available. So I was really impressed that, you know, as a driver, you need to know exactly what, if you're having understeer, oversteer, and how you can cure that live on track, and working with your engineers. I really love that about this championship.
And in terms of Maserati, new driver lineup for them this year, in terms of the race team with Stoffel and Jake in the cockpit, what's the atmosphere like in the team? Are they full of anticipation for this season?
Yeah, I think it was great that, you know, they're both coming in without having been with the team. So there's like a lot of processes, obviously, that they're maybe not used to and they want to change. And I think bringing a different perspective and they both driven different cars, I think that's also very beneficial for the team itself. So it's really nice to have that kind of combination of drivers. I raced Jake in GP3 maybe ages ago, but he was always super open. It's the first time I sort of worked with Stoffel. I drove his car and was with his engineer, so it was really nice to kind of see, you know, a Formula E champion, the way he approaches testing and all the information they give on the debrief. So I think, you know, we'll see a lot of progress from these guys over the year.
And one of the things we emphasise a lot is the relationship between the engineer and the driver, making sure that you've got that synergy. Obviously, two drivers coming over to a new team. How do you make sure that you can sort of fast-track that and make sure that you're communicating in the most effective way?
Yeah, I think that's something really important, that it doesn't come easy, and I think that's why we'll see a lot of like progress from the team and that communication coming alive. And I think that's why simulator work is so important, the preseason testing, and I think that's, you know, this is only the second race of the season, and that relationship needs time, but I think once it's there, we'll see them shine. And they have really good people, you know, from other teams as well that they have brought on board. So they also need that integration, and yeah, I'm sure we'll see them do really well this year.
Tatiana, looks like you brought the sun with you. Just looking at the action we've got out on track now, it looks like it's starting to dry up as we've got one of Nissan's rolling there, running very deep. It's definitely a drying circuit. Coming into qualifying, which is up next, what would be your approach going into that session? You know, seeing the conditions we've got out there, you know, would you be wanting to be the last one over the line realistically in the group sessions?
Absolutely, I think. Well, you know that as well, right? I would say it's not always easy to time, right? Because sometimes, you know, you do mistakes and it doesn't go the way you wanted. But I think, you know, the last car crossing the line will be probably the quickest. But those conditions are super extreme. I think it's the first time they have sort of like a wet track with this compound of tire, no? So I think they're out there learning a lot.
Certainly is. Well, anyway, just under 16 minutes left of this session. Let's go down to Alexa, who's in pit lane. She's catching up with team principal for Maserati MSG, Cyril Blaze.
Thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, I'm joined by Cyril, and the team are looking pretty quick today. You're going very nice near the top of the timesheets. Are you suited to this wet weather track conditions? Is this something that you've had a bit of experience in?
It looks like it. Yeah, it's going well. Obviously, tricky condition for everybody. First time we're really running on the wet. A very slippery condition, but yeah, we seem to have some pace. So obviously, it's still free practice, so you need to convert that in qualifying. The weather forecast is a bit uncertain, so we're not sure what condition we're going to get for qualifying, but at least in those conditions, the package and the driver seems to be shooting, so the driver and the team seems to be working well, so it's always a good start of the day.
And Jake Hughes, new to the team, how's he settling in? Because historically, he's been very good around this Mexico track.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we signed him. And he's doing very well. He's been settling into the team very well. Obviously, there's a little bit of time for everything to gel, you know, and obviously the more time you spend in the team, the more confident you get. But he looks like he's been in the team for more than a race. So very positive start, and obviously at Sao Paulo, we didn't get the result that I think we deserve, so we're really keen to put that right today in Mexico.
Thank you so much, Cyril. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Alexa. Thanks to Cyril Blaze there as well. Nice to hear from the team principal for Maserati MSG. 4th at the moment for Jake Hughes, 13th for Stoffel Vandoorne. Still just under 15 minutes left of the session to go. So looking forward to seeing how these times will begin to develop, especially as you can see the sun is now out. The track should, in theory, begin to dry out at a significantly faster rate. One thing we can see here, Tatiana, is drivers really struggling to get the tyres in the right operating window. They seem to be sliding all over the place at the moment.
Yeah, that's something actually like, you know, when we tested in Spain, we were struggling massively to generate that temperature. So I can imagine it's busy out there on the steering wheel for these drivers to really make those tires really stick to the ground. And even yesterday, you know, we saw a lot of people like sliding, and it's going to be the key for qualifying, definitely.
Saw Nick Cassidy a few moments ago with a clear visor on, actually, which is quite a rare sight in Formula E, to actually see where his eyes are looking and so on from a driver's perspective.
Yeah, we're always used to seeing tinted visors because it's not often we get too many wet weather races. I think Formula E do well at, you know, navigating the calendar that way, so we're always in the sunshine normally. But we have come to Mexico, we have got a bit of rain overnight, and that means that, you know, a clear visor is the choice for Nick Cassidy this morning.
Well, look, compared to London, it's -4 at the moment. I'll take this weather any day of the week. Tatiana, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really great to have you here, and looking forward to seeing you back out in the car hopefully later on this year with Maserati.
Oh, thanks for having me, and hopefully we'll see a very entertaining race today.
Wonderful. Tatiana Calderon, thank you very much indeed. Looking at the drivers then coming around the circuit, this is Mitch Evans navigating his way through here at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. So through into the stadium section there for Mitch Evans, and you can see he's got a clear visor on as well. So Jaguar now starting to improve, lap times beginning to start coming down. Personal best sector times here for Mitch Evans, down in 22nd place at the moment, but you can still see him fighting the car through. He's not on an attack mode lap, so he's only in two-wheel drive power at the moment, but we've just broken into the 130 barrier for the first time, courtesy of Jake Dennis, which, you know, relative to yesterday is very slow, but relative to where we were about 15 minutes ago, quite good.
Yeah, it's crazy when you actually see that the sunshine is out and it's not a completely wet circuit, that it's just sort of, you know, drying out. To be 20 seconds off the pace, it's a very different situation as to what you'd have in a lot of different race series, but that's what they have here in Formula E, using the same tyre, come dry, come wet. It does present a challenge in these mixed conditions.
I think we also have to remember it's only 8 o'clock in the morning, so the track temperature is still super low, even though the sun's coming out. The sun isn't really beating through with a lot to evaporate the water, but the work rate on the steering wheel, the throttle and the brake of the drivers doing, yeah, like Jake Dennis now, to go at a 130 is significantly more than he did in the dry yesterday. You know, the feeling and sensitivity is incredible that they require.
Let's have a look here at Nick Cassidy coming down towards the first corner. Oh, rear instability, locking, going in towards turn 1. Manages to make the corner and most of the apex there, but yeah, fighting for control. I mean, to be fair, going through the Peraltada, we see drivers fighting for control in the dry, and if you can bring a bit of water into the equation, that's really making things a lot more difficult.
Yeah, it's definitely, since Formula E started to come here to this circuit, it's been a common theme that part of the circuit has always presented a challenge, and it looks like with these Gen 3 Evo cars, it's just the same challenge as what they faced before. And obviously attack mode, when it comes to the race, will help, you know, with having that all-wheel drive will definitely benefit the drivers, give them more grip to be able to deal with that tricky nature of that final corner.
Ed Mortara coming across the timing line, fighting for grip, fighting for control. A couple of yellow flags have just come out. We have one down at turn 16, but that has since been cleared. So 10 minutes now left to go in this session. Alan, relatively speaking, what sort of relevance do you think we're going to have in FP2 compared to qualifying? If conditions continue to dry out, obviously it shouldn't be that important, but if it does rain,
I don't think if it rains, to be honest with you. I think the track is drying so slowly because, as I said, we're 8 o'clock in the morning and it isn't warm outside, even though the sun's out now and shining, still not warm. So the track is likely to be relatively damp in places, quite a few places, when they start qualifying. So now I think it is more relevant than what it was at the beginning of the session when it was completely wet, because it was never going to be in that condition we expect for the rest of the day. But this is a relevant condition, I think.
Yeah, and I think as well, what's worth noting is, you know, these Formula E weekends, Formula E are the only cars out on track. So, you know, with other race weekends, we have more different series out on circuit. It helps to dry the circuit quicker. So when these cars aren't on circuit, not a lot's going to be going on out there to help dry it further.
You can see the stadium section here, just how slippery it is going through. It's very, very slick when it goes onto the change of surface, and Jake just really struggling to get that car rotated in the front end. You can see also struggling to put the power down here through that final corner. He's being so ginger on the throttle.
He was only straight on the steering wheel, absolutely straight when he went on to flat out wide open throttle. Before that it was 10, 20, 30% on and off.
Nick Cassidy in the box then for Jaguar at the moment. 20th fastest for him and 22nd for Mitch Evans. So progress for the team to make towards the end of this session. This is into the stadium section where we've seen so many drivers struggling to get the car rotated. See the sun also designed, and a spin there for Nick Cassidy as well. So he actually rotated the car all the way round, facing the right way.
I think that would have been the double yellow flags that we saw earlier on that had noted at turn 16. It was just a slow, lazy spin round, one where in the car you just think, oh my goodness.
You ever been in the go-kart when you're on slick tyres in the wet and you spin it around and you just feel pathetic, don't you? It's one of those.
It is one of those, but it's down to the really challenging conditions. He's definitely generated a bit of rear tyre temperature by, you know, spinning them up to turn himself back round the right way. Just looking at that section of corners going into the attack mode, I think it's really interesting. We've seen a few onboards going into that section of the circuit where the white paint almost looks like it's sort of coming away from the circuit a little bit.
No problem, that was a good improvement to then let Beckman go.
Yeah, no, but so we do one more lap or we have to come in?
No, we don't have to come in. We're going to do basically the whole session on this tyre set and then just scrub the others at the end.
Voice of Connor Somerville there, race engineer for Sebastian Buemi, just talking about their run plan for the remainder of this session, asking if he's going to come into the box and change over, but they're going to go to the end of the session on this set of tyres.
Which then tells me that they're keeping a very fresh set of tyres for the actual qualifying itself. Very logical, to be honest, and I think the majority of the teams will be doing the same.
Yeah, I heard that actually in the pit lane yesterday, drivers and teams alike saying that they're probably going to do practice session on one set of tyres, then change over to qualifying, so they've got a fresh set so they can get as much grip as possible. Obviously a lot more emphasis now with tyres and durations of life going into the race, especially with this four-wheel drive attack mode and also full power in the duels as well, as Dennis runs off down at the first corner. So Jaguar having a bit of a mixed bag of things at the moment. Nick Cassidy down there in 21st place. Mitch Evans slightly higher up in 14th position. But of course, they were the team that took the first victory of season 11. We've got a bit of a burnout going on here as well. Looks like somebody's had a bit of a spin in the middle part of the lap. But let's head down to Alexa then and catch up with team principal for Jaguar TCS Racing, James Barclay.
Thank you, Tom. We're joined with James now, and you're not currently at the end of the timing sheets that perhaps we're used to seeing you at. Can you talk us through what your plans are for this session, what's going on?
Yeah, obviously wet conditions for everyone for really the first time obviously this season. We've done a little bit in our development testing, so yeah, a bit of a voyage of discovery, a few things we're noticing, but yeah, some way to go. We've made some changes with Nick, and he's already on a quicker sector there. We've had a couple of laps for track limits, so yeah, it's all about learning, and yeah, come quali in the race, that's what matters.
And for those who aren't so familiar with how a race team runs, what kind of changes you can make to the car, what kind of things are you doing to try and improve the performance of the car?
Yeah, a big thing in wet conditions is tyre pressures, right? That's a lot of things that people will be sweeping and trying. You're looking at how stiff you have the car, how soft you have the car. So yeah, it's there's a philosophy on what makes this new tyre work, and that's the big thing today. It's the new tyre. That's really the understanding that, yeah, you'll see, I think, everyone trying to get a sweep of setups and get a view of where they're at.
And last time out, obviously, Mitch taking home that incredible win. It was the attack mode strategy that largely did it for him with that impressive move that you made. How much conversations have you had about that this weekend? How different do you expect it to be?
Yeah, honestly, if you look at Mitch's win, I think both cars fighting for the podium, fighting with the win. But actually, Mitch overtaking 10 cars in the first lap, honestly, is what really changed it. And that was not on attack mode. So I think it was a combination of when we had the attack, we took it at the right time, but actually just very, very strong overtaking in the opening laps, particularly from Mitch.
Thanks so much, James. We'll let you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexa. Thanks to James Barclay. It wasn't a spin. It was Antonio Fuchs da Costa lighting up the rear tyres like he's pulling away from the traffic lights.
And you mentioned earlier, Tom, about having the clear visors on. You could see in Antonio's eyes there, he was loving every minute of that.
Yeah, just trying to get some rear tyre temperature there for Da Costa. You can see that Buemi here in attack mode, the magenta light, so he's got full power, 350 kilowatts, and four-wheel drive. Just look at the car and how different the language of it is compared to two-wheel drive mode. He'll have significantly more traction coming through these corners, and he won't be fighting the steering wheel anywhere near as much.
It's quite dry in that stadium section now. The actual line is relatively dry. Then you get down through this last corner, and it's anything but dry. It hasn't looked as if it's dried up at all from the beginning of the session, probably because it's also in the shade from the grandstand that you're going round the back of.
Yeah, so across the timing line there for Buemi in the Envision. Second quickest for him in the session with 4 minutes to go. And as we heard on the team radio a few moments ago, their plan is to run to the end of the session on the one set of tyres rather than coming in and making a pit stop. Let's have a look at some onboard here from Buemi. Despite being in four-wheel drive, he's still soaring away at that wheel through the final turn. But a beautiful four-wheel drift. Well, a little bit. A bit of a correction towards the end. Now lap times are going to start coming down towards the end of this session, aren't they here? Pascal Wehrlein, reigning world champion for the Tag Heuer Porsche team. Difficult opening weekend of the season for him, pole position, and then of course ending up on his side in spectacular fashion in Sao Paulo, so no points on the board for him so far. And he'll be hoping for a stronger weekend, and it's a track that he goes well at. He's won here on a couple of occasions back in 2024, the start of season 10, earlier on in that year, and also in 2022 as well. So it's a track that he goes well at, and we'll see what sort of performance he's going to be able to extract out of this Porsche as we head into qualifying a little bit later on this morning. And there's quite a short turnaround actually between free practice 2 and as we head into qualifying. So what do you think the teams, the drivers, are going to be debriefing about as we head in towards that crucial session?
Well, my opinion, looking at Florian Modlinger here, you talk about Pascal's record, he's won here 5 times. And so from the point of view of winning with Audi and also then with Porsche, he's got the record, I would say, of the best of anybody around this circuit. But it's about following the track evolution. It's about making changes you need to make, but I think there'll be subtle changes. I don't see anything that's going to be dramatic. Even if you're struggling with performance, Lucas de Grassi, for example, who we're looking at now, he was up there yesterday and he's right down at the back at this moment in time. You would just want to be tickling away at the changes that you would make to the car, because this track's going to be very different when you actually get out there. But the thing is, we don't know exactly how different.
Yeah, and it does make it interesting in terms of the drivers who struggled in the dry conditions yesterday, because we expect the conditions are slowly going to work their way back towards it being dry, potentially in time for qualifying. And if you were struggling yesterday and you've made changes overnight to the car, you haven't had a chance to actually see whether those changes are the right changes. So it does leave an element of uncertainty with drivers and what they've got underneath them coming into qualifying.
On board here then with Lucas de Grassi, man who's won here on a couple of occasions and also lost here on one occasion as well, as he ran out of energy on the final lap a few years ago. In fact, no, beg your pardon, that was Pascal Wehrlein who ran out of energy, wasn't it? And de Grassi went on to take the win. I'll correct myself there. Here we are then with Nick Cassidy as we head through this middle sector of the lap. Alan nodding in agreement. Of course you're going to remember that.
Thank you very much. You know, I was very glad I didn't have to correct you myself.
So looking here at Nick Cassidy just making his way through. Fastest first sector then for him. We saw him having a bit of a spin a few moments ago. And this is the tricky part of the track. You're absolutely right there, Billy. The paint is being worn away on the outside of that stadium section. Drivers just trying to maximise the angle of turn 15 as they head through into attack mode.
Yeah, and also just that section of the track where it is particularly low grip, using attack mode and going right around the outside where none of the drivers have really been exploring that part of the track, it potentially, you know, adds a little bit of jeopardy to using attack mode, where it could be slightly slippery and catch drivers out with, you know, trying to get over that when it comes to the race.
Look at that for a lap time for Nick Cassidy, 0.6 of a second quicker than Pascal Wehrlein with 30 seconds left on the clock. That's a fantastic bit of driving for him. Nick de Vries also slotting himself up into third quickest in the Mahindra as well.
Yeah, de Vries has been pretty quick. The last 2 laps of de Vries have been up there, putting himself back up into the top 3. And as now we see if we can, Wehrlein who's been quickest in the first sector, and quite half a second slower than Cassidy in the middle, whether he can pull it back in the final corner.
So Wehrlein then making his way around that final corner. Cooper Kiro's just been balked by then here as he comes through that last turn. David Beckman just in the way, unfortunately. Wrong place, wrong time for Wehrlein.
That's really not good, is it?
No, that was also, it ruined that lap and also the next lap. You know, there I think there should have been a radio message to the driver that Verline's on his way.
Yeah, good chance the stewards will probably be having a look at that, I would have thought. I was just having a look at Beckman actually as well. He's down in 22nd at the moment, 12 seconds off the pace, so clearly something has not gone well for him in this session. They've had to rebuild that car overnight courtesy of his shunt into the wall at the end of FP1. Let's have a look here at Jake Dennis, carrying a lot of understeer through that final zone, isn't he? You can see a lot of lock on the steering through there. Goes up third quickest nonetheless. Good end to the session there for the Season 9 World Champion.
Interesting, looking at the sector times there, that Jake Dennis was the fastest in the last sector, so his car was set up, you could see, more to, you know, create a bit of understeer in the car, and that looked to give him an extra bit of performance in that last part of lap compared to the drivers who have been coming through there with the rear sliding.
Probably confidence as well, do you think there? Maybe just give him a little bit of confidence to keep the throttle on a bit heavier. He knew what the car was going to be doing.
Yeah, it almost looked like he set the car into a bit of understeer and then just held it there on the throttle, just really balancing and being smooth on the pedals. It was a nice bit of driving to watch there.
So De Grassi making his way through this final corner as well in the lowly Yamaha app, just goes up 13th quickest at the end of the session. Checkered flag is now out, as you can see. There was a bit of traffic a few moments ago that we saw. That's something to keep an eye on, especially as we head in towards the group stages of qualifying. There'll be 11 cars out on track for Group A and for Group B. And we did see it a little bit last year. Drivers may end up getting their lap times impeded, someone on a slow lap and a driver on an attack lap. So we'll keep an eye out for that as we head in towards that all-important qualifying session. And there is a lot of talk about how important that is going to be here this weekend. Obviously, Sao Paulo was a bit of a chaotic race. There are a lot of variables going into there, a couple of red flags, some full course yellows, safety cars and so on and so forth. Here at Mexico, due to the very nature of the circuit, it should in theory be a little bit less action-packed, and that means that you're unlikely to see Mitch Evans coming from last to first like we saw.
I mean, that hasn't happened in Formula E history before, has it? So, I mean, the odds of him being able to replicate that 2 races in a row, yeah, would suggest that, you know, it's going to be tricky. And like you said, Tom, the nature of the circuit does suggest qualifying is slightly more important than when we saw in Sao Paulo.
Cyril Blaze then inside the Maserati MSG garage. Jake Hughes just popping in a lap time to go fastest at the end of that session by just over 1.5 tenths from Nick Cassidy. So that's a great end to the session for the 30-year-old then, as he makes his way back into the pit box. He actually asked me to call him the boy from Birmingham because I think he got a bit jealous about me calling Ollie Rowland the boy from Barnsley. But there we go. I thought he to call Zane Maloney the boy from Barbados as well, so we're going to have a lot of references to that over the course of this season, I'm sure. So practice starts now taking place on the start-finish straight then here.
I'm not sure what the McLaren did at burnout, but then has gone beyond his actual normal starting point.
So practice starts then ongoing for the drivers. They make their way away from the lights. Big old burnout there. Look at this.
Do you think that's Antonio Felix da Costa?
I'd hedge a good bet it was.
Maybe that's part of the plan. Create a smoke screen so you can't see your competitors.
The wacky races restarts.
So on board then here with Taylor Barnard. Let's have a look and see what sort of traction he is going to have away from the lights. You can see still quite damp even on the racing line.
Remember, they're using all-wheel drive in these situations, so the front wheels are also powering as well as the rears off the start.
Let's have a look then for Taylor Barnard. On board we ride with the youngster from Norwich. And even with the four-wheel drive, you can see a fair bit of rear-wheel slip for him, but manages to get away quite nicely. Hopefully the track will be fully dry as we head in towards the race this afternoon, and that won't be too much of a problem. So then, free practice 2 concludes here in Mexico City, and it is Jake Hughes who is fastest in the Maserati MSG racing machine, ahead of Nick Cassidy and Pascal Wehrlein. 3 different powertrains inside the top 3, ahead of Jake Dennis, Antonio Felix da Costa. Nick de Vries also up there as well, ahead of Robin Freint, Stoffel van Dorn, Maximilian Günther in the DS Penske, and then Oliver Rowland in the Nissan, concluding inside the top 10 as well. A fair old gap actually between the top 10. Yesterday we saw 16 drivers in FP1 separated by a second. As you can see here with the mixed conditions that we've had, a lot more spread out is the field. Mitch Evans 11th quickest ahead of Nico Muller, Jean-Eric Verne, Dan Ticktum, Taylor Barnard and Sam Bird. A bit of a trio of Brits down there in 16th, 17th and 18th place ahead of Zane Maloney, Norman Nato, Eden Mortara, and then David Beckman having a bit of a difficult session. Of course, that car rebuilt overnight courtesy of his trip into the barriers at the end of free practice 1, so a fair bit of adjusting for the Cupra Hero team to do. See the clouds still quite prominent overhead here. We are at a fairly high altitude as we look at a plane making its way in towards the Mexico City airport, and there is still a very prominent threat of rain throughout the rest of today. Whether it will hit for the race this afternoon or not remains to be seen, but certainly for qualifying I reckon we're going to be starting the sessions at least with a damp track.
Yes, it's in an hour and a half's time. The circuit's going to be damp in places. I wouldn't say over the whole circuit, because we've already seen in the stadium it's drying up quite quickly. But it's going to be tricky conditions, and especially that first run, I think, is going to be very important for people to get a lap time on the board.
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely going to provide a different challenge to what we saw in Sao Paulo, which I think is good. It's good to keep these drivers on their toes. You know, we don't want them to have it too easy, do we?
No, it certainly does make things interesting. We love a variable in Formula E, and well, we saw quite a few of those in Sao Paulo, and now we've got them here in Mexico City as well. Nick Cassidy jumps his way out of the Jaguar TCS racing machine, just goes over to chat to Phil Ingram there. Phil taking on a new role at the Jaguar team for the 2025 season, and new race engineer for Nick Cassidy for this year as well. This is the spin I think we're going to see for him, as he just rotates the car round down at turn 15. Managed to get the car righted, and a lovely burnout as well. The fans watching on in the stadium section would have absolutely loved that. But yeah, not the fastest way to negotiate your way around this Mexico City Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez circuit.
I'm sure if you're Jaguar, you're hoping that you're not going to need those tyres at any point in time throughout the rest of the day.
Jake Dennis also jumping his way out of the Andretti. That team failing to score points in Sao Paulo. Jake Dennis coming to a stop with a technical problem. Nico Muller's race also coming to an early conclusion courtesy of an incident with Jake Hughes. And they will be looking to get their first points on the board of the season here this afternoon. Well, let's take a look then at some highlights from free practice 2 here in Mexico City. The green light came on, and it was a very damp and slippery circuit to start the day. It didn't improve as the session continued on, but it was certainly a challenge for the drivers. Lap times down in the early 1 minute 30s for a fair old chunk of the session, and we saw drivers fighting for control, especially that final corner here, Billy.
Yeah, the final corner has definitely been a challenge. Like Alan touched on earlier, it's hidden behind that stadium section. It hasn't been in the sun, so it's definitely the part of the circuit that I expect to be the slowest to dry up throughout the course of, you know, the time period between qualifying and then in qualifying itself.
See a drier, slicker line began to appear towards the end of the session at the final turn. This was Jake Hughes making his way around, having a bit of a slip and a slide in Estadio as well. Likewise, David Beckman also getting out of shape just in front of Stoffel Van Dorn. A lovely save on that occasion, and thankfully for Beckman, no trips into the barrier in this second free practice session. Conditions did improve. Unfortunately, it didn't improve that lap time for Nick Cassidy on this occasion as he slid his way round. A bit of a spin and burnout in his session, and a lovely burnout also for Antonio Felix da Costa. Session coming to a conclusion. We saw Pascal Wehrlein putting in a quick lap at the end of the session, third quickest for him in the Tag Heuer Porsche. Nick Cassidy also coming across the line, second fastest as well, but it was Jake Hughes in the Maserati MSG who topped the pile. So then, focus now shifts over to qualifying ahead of the second round of season 11 of the ABB FIA Formula E World Championship. That kicks on at 20 to 10 local time. So that's about an hour and 20 minutes or so. Short turnaround then for teams and drivers. And what sort of discussions are they going to be having in the box after this session, Alan?
I think there's a few of them going to be saying, God, how slippery that circuit was at the beginning, how difficult it was to generate tire temperature, but then they've got to get straight on to the point of what they're going to do for qualifying. Are they going to make any adjustments? Is the circuit going to be dry? What are they going to do in tire pressures critically? Because that's something that is going to be extremely critical in terms of trying to get the grip. As you see here, track temperature 14 degrees. That's about 10, 12 less than it was yesterday afternoon in the dry.
Certainly was. Well, that does bring an end to free practice 2. We kick off qualifying at 20 to 10 local time here in Mexico.